Hello everyone. This one is going to be a heavy topic. I know many of you are disappointed with Sunday's V5 nerf and the lack of buffs to his eidolons. I am too. As someone who saved for a year for my favorites, it was sad to see. I made the wrong decision to look at some subreddits and see what the community was saying. And this video is a direct result of that bad move. Let's talk about doom posting, toxic positivity, and personal bias. When the V5 changes dropped, there was an overwhelming amount of people voicing their disappointment for his nerf, and more importantly, the lack of buffs his eidolons received. I want to make it very clear that the majority of these folks were not doom posters. Yes, there were quote-unquote doom posters, but they were few and far in between. And when people saw the dooming, they were rightfully called out in the comments. Then a strange phenomenon started to arise where people were telling others to stop doom posting when people weren't. I found this to be extremely strange. And honestly, I feel like this word has lost all meaning. I get it. People do not like a flood of negativity, even if it is based on sound criticism. It is less cognitive dissonance to label as dooming and move on. But someone's lack of ability to handle criticism of a fictional character's kid is not my problem. Let me give you some specific examples. Some folks thought Sunday's V5 nerfs targeted Sunday's ability to synergize with non-summon units. This is a factually true statement. How can I be so sure? Well, if you actually read the change logs, he did not get a general 10% damage increase nerf. Hoyoverse tweaked the buff so that instead of granting 40% damage increase for all hypercarries and then additional 40% if they have a summon, now Sunday grants 30% damage increase for everyone and then additional 50% if they have a summon. This changes nothing if Sunday is being used for his niche, which is summon support. It only nerfed his buffs for non-summon hypercarries. His E1 nerf also adds to this. It slightly nerfs the hypercarry, but not the summon. From the way that they nerfed him, you can see Hoyoverse's intentions. The intention is to limit the usage outside Sunday's niche. If they thought Sunday was too overtuned in general, then they would have generally nerfed his buffs. But they didn't. They specifically nerfed his usage with non-summon hypercarries. Did they succeed in doing this with the V5 nerf? No, they didn't. 10% damage increase nerf does not do anything in the grand scheme of things right now. Keyword, right now. Another angle to this is that Sunday isn't the only harmony that will be added. 10% damage increase here, 10% attack there, 10% defense shred here. As multiple harmonies are used, the slight incompatibilities of said harmonies with existing DPSs will eventually lead to older units being left behind. We all know this. A unit being 5% better than the previous one doesn't seem like a big deal, but if that happens with every single character, well, the line of compounded interest of inflation goes up. So here lies the two problems I have with the toxic positivity cult, who keep saying that this isn't a big deal, you're doom posting, this doesn't change anything, etc. Number one, attempting to do something and not quite getting it, it doesn't mean that they didn't try to do something. They tried to nerf Sunday's usage with older DPSs. Hoyo probably thought Sunday was too good outside his niche and nerfed him very gently. Number two, many folks have been using this rhetoric of V5 Sunday nerfs basically changing nothing in the grand scheme of things to overlook the fact that old hypercarry DPSs did not even need a slight nerf. I don't know what the heck is so hard to understand about that. Do y'all not use Dilf or Jinglu or Blade? Old hypercarries are struggling. I use a bunch of them, and I know that every last bit of buffs count when the whole cycle system depends on shelling out enough DPS in a given number of turns. Even 1% can be a difference of clearing and not clearing. You know this game. You've played this game. Why do you not understand this? The only thing weird about this nerf is if Hoyo really wanted to limit Sunday's usage with regular hypercarries, then they should have been more aggressive with the nerf. I think 20% damage increase nerf would have been significant, especially if you are running E0S0 or E1S0 Sunday. For me, based on all the information, it wouldn't be surprising if Hoyoverse decided to nerf Sunday further, since 10% damage increase nerf effectively achieved nothing as per the community. By the way, don't get it twisted. I am not asking for a nerf. I am merely observing and predicting. I could be wrong. They might nerf his usability with other hypercarries in a different way by adding a certain character that discourages that, or maybe they won't even do that. I don't know. What I'm saying is that this is a possibility, and Hoyoverse has the incentive to do this, to sell more new characters, okay? But again, I know that the comments will say that I am doom posting by saying these things, despite the fact that I was incredibly positive about Sunday's base kit in my previous video. Go watch it. It is very relevant since I made it post V3. Now, there are genuine Doom posters who have said ridiculous things like, is Sunday even viable anymore in the non-summon teams? And I'm not here to defend that. He's still the best in slot for many old hypercarry teams and Boot Hill. These people are few and far in between. I just want to reiterate that. It's not a thing. People are not dooming. Which leads to the main group of people that I would like to talk about in this video, as you've noticed, the toxic positivity cult. I thought this was befitting since we are all part of the Church of Sunday. Rejoice, everyone. Ha ha ha. Sometimes I feel like I'm crazy when I'm surrounded by the toxic positivity cult because they definitely live in a different version of reality than me. Now, let's define what is toxic positivity and what it isn't in the context of Sunday's V5. His V5 nerf doesn't change anything. Yes, they did not need to nerf him at all since the old hypercarries do need all the buffs. However, it is maximum 3 to 5% nerf, and that isn't going to make him unusable with traditional hypercarries. This might be aggravated with newer supports coming in that may preferentially buff the newer hypercarries or summons, but right now in the grand scheme of things, he is still the best in slot for all old hypercarries by a big margin. Believe it or not, this is not toxic positivity. I know, surprising. This actually addresses the core issues that people have with this nerf. Number 1, this nerf was unnecessary when considering the fact that old non-summon hypercarry units were falling behind hard, and Sunday's existence is not going to flip that upside down. They will still struggle. Especially, it is very evident that the servant meta will cause incredible HP inflation, as we did with previous metas like follow-up and super break. So yes, this was totally unnecessary. Now, if they're worried about buffing hypercarries that release after Sunday, well then that's not my problem, is it? Maybe you should have balanced your game properly. Anyways, number 2, added concern of Harmony's having artificial preference for newer units. Sure, Robin is a follow-up buffer, but she is powerful and universal. She really helped older characters become more meta. This is good. The fact that they are literally building the preferential buffs into a kit is concerning. Can you imagine if Robin's added damage whenever an ally attacks had higher multipliers only when those attacks were follow-ups? That would be really bad and locking her behind a specific meta. So yes, this is a concern. Number 3, acknowledging the slight nerf of the kit to bias summon units can compound into a huge issue for existing units. Let's say the next Harmony character does this too. They only either work with summons or have the same bias in the kit where they buff non-summon characters less. This will definitely add up, and it's not good. Yeah, the above comment addresses all 3 of them. And I would not mind talking to this person about whether or not these changes are actually good, bad, etc., right? Like, I would be down to talking to them because they actually acknowledge the problems instead of just ignoring them. This is toxic positivity. He's fine. You're doom posting if you think V5 nerf actually changes anything. You are ridiculous for insinuating that Hoyoverse is trying to limit his usage with traditional hypercarries. He's already strong E0 S1 and you should be grateful that they didn't lock his true potential behind an eidolon. And by the way, his eidolons may be not the best, but other Harmony characters don't have good eidolons either. This is toxic positivity. I think what really defines toxic positivity for me is when they have to deny reality to make their statements true. For example, that Hoyoverse is not trying to make him less viable with traditional hypercarries. I've already explained this, but I will reiterate, they intended to nerf him in his non-niche use cases. It is evident in the way that they nerfed him. It was not a general nerf. They specifically nerfed his non-niche use cases. I repeat, they specifically nerfed his non-niche use cases. It looks like they didn't succeed in nerfing him because the nerf was not aggressive enough, though time will tell if this slight nerf will keep compounding to a bigger issue. Anyone who has read the changelogs and had a working brain should have picked up on the intentions. They have to be misinformed or ignorant or lying to say something like this. As for the latter half of the statement of he's already strong E0 S1 and you should be grateful that they didn't lock his true potential behind an eidolon, Sunday really wants his light cone. I've already discussed this in my previous video, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. Actually, you can watch the video right over here, top right hand corner. It's going to be a clickable thingy. But TLDR is that Sunday's flexibility with team comps decreased significantly and he may run into rotation issues without his signature. Side note here, we don't know why Sunday is so SP positive. This may be set up intentionally and hinting that future supports Sunday may work with can be SP hungry. So yeah, his true potential may be locked behind S1 even more so than we can predict. We don't know yet. I repeat, his SP generation is gated behind his signature. His ability to ult without relying on being hit is gated behind his signature. I would call this potential locked behind something. The subreddit has so many people saying that Bronia's Lycone is just as good when that is not true. Honestly, at this point, this falls under the category of misinformation. I know some free-to-play players don't have the currency to pull, but that doesn't mean you can just go around coping and telling people that it's just as good. Okay, that's not true. So with that, I believe that his light cone should have been part of his kit, honestly. Many characters work fine without their signature, but Sunday is definitely not one of them in my opinion. It also doesn't help that the one light cone you can use on him is Bronia's light cone, something that you can only guarantee by buying it from the Star Glitter shop. It's basically a scam. I hope I've convinced you that the lie that Sunday's potential is not gated by anything is another delusion present in the statement. And lastly, saying be grateful that $1 billion company didn't do this worst thing just reeks of toxic positivity. They shouldn't be doing that in the first place. I don't know why I need to feel grateful. It also was really weird to see people defending his eidolons because other Harmony characters have bad eidolons too. I will explain why I arrived at this conclusion later in the video, but this is simply not true. But disregarding that, right, even if his eidolons were just as bad as other Harmonies, just because previous Harmonies had bad eidolons, it doesn't mean that Sunday needs to. With that logic, no one should have good eidolons because 1.0 characters had really bad eidolons. What are you talking about? Another side note here, what Hoyoverse did to Jade especially was bad. Her E1 should have been built into her kit, honestly. This is one of the most egregious potential locked behind an eidolon thing I've ever seen in this game. Back to regular programming. Now, let's talk about personal bias. This is an important topic to me. Whenever I start talking to someone about a kit or eidolons, I would be very frustrated because both of us have not disclosed our personal bias when it comes to judging a character. What do I think makes an eidolon great? What do I think makes a character's kit universal? These opinions will inform how we judge a character. Not knowing this and diving into a conversation like this is like going to war without ammunition. Recently, Waveman did a video explaining the limitations of theory crafting. It is called How Numbers Lie to You, the Jiao Chu theorem. You should definitely watch this. I agree 100% with their sentiments. They bring up now memeified statements like Black Swan is 10% better than Sampo and explain how the true statement of Black Swan is 10% better than Sampo in a single target scenario got warped by people misinterpreting the data. Of course this is true. Sampo's best case scenario is single target and Black Swan's worst case scenario is single target. Theory crafting is based on personal bias and assumptions. No matter how reasonable they might be, we need to look at them critically. So here is where I explain my personal biases when assessing a character's kit or when I do calculations for stuff, etc. These are some aspects of a kit that makes me undervalue a character. Unable to enable their own gimmick by themselves. Depends on RNG in any fashion to work. How easy it is to make them useless in a battle. How niche they are. They require a dedicated support. Vertical investment being just a stat stick. Characters require high investment. Requires technical understanding to make them work properly. These are some aspects of a kit that makes me value a character. Self-enablers of their own gimmick. No RNG required. Flexibility in the way that they operate. Flexibility in team compositions. How universal they are. They work well even without a dedicated support. Vertical investment transforms the kit and allows for unique experiences. Characters work even at low investments. Easy to use. Let's take our time to analyze this further because I really need people to understand where I'm coming from, because we cannot be having this conversation about a character's kit being bad or good when we fundamentally disagree on these topics, okay? Number 1, unable to enable their own gimmick by themselves versus self-enablers of their own gimmick. Can you imagine if Blade had his follow-up mechanic stayed the same, but he lost the ability to self-harm and heal? Blade, despite his low damage, is an enabler of his own gimmick, and I rate him highly on that specifically. Is he underpowered? Yes, but that is not because of the design of his gimmick. He has really bad multipliers and no dedicated support to account for the bad multipliers. That's all. Can you imagine Fei Xiao exclusively relying on her teammates to charge up her ult? It would definitely make her less viable. I think this is why I undervalue Acheron's kit just a tad bit. I'm not saying she's weak in the current meta. Don't get it twisted. She's powerful. She's arguably one of the most powerful hypercarries in the entire game. But she is only able to raise her ult stack by 1 or 2 in one turn if she's E0. Sure, other characters enable her ult very well, and these characters are very accessible, so it isn't an issue now. But I'm just pointing out the structural flaw that exists in her kit. Number 2, depends on RNG in any fashion to work versus no RNG required. This is a very broad category, so I will only mention a few that I think are relevant. A kit requiring you to be hit in order to ult in a given number of turns is very bad. Sure, in the current state of the endgame, being hit is not a problem, and many will say that I am barking up a nothing burger. However, experienced players of turn-based combat know that anything is possible, and we don't even need to speculate into the future. The DOT bosses we have in the current pure fiction do not give any energy because they don't technically hit you directly. The bugs in the pure fiction will also not hit you, and when they do, they explode and apply AoE CC, which is more likely to mess up your rotations. So we can come up with endless scenarios where getting hit by the enemy is not a viable choice anymore. Maybe the enemy does single target damage so aggressive that it one-hit KOs your characters. This forces you to bring a preservation unit. If you were using Ho-Ho for energy, this is already bad news. Gepard has higher aggro values. Preservation units have bigger baseline aggro, but Gepard has more on top of that, meaning it is unlikely that the character you want gets hit, i.e. you have to reset to get a proper rotation. If you bring Fu Xuan, her SP usage might become a problem. Aventurine is probably the only solution here, but this means that you will need to have this specific preservation unit. What about in the case of having servants? I believe that servants will have their own HP and aggro values, meaning the more servants you have on the team, the less likely it is for the unit that you want to get hit to be hit based on chance alone. Let's say the chances of being hit in a regular team of 4 is 1/4. I know it's more complicated than that, I know, but let's just simplify here. If you have 4 allies plus 3 servants, then that's 1 in 7's chance. So yes, it can be very unreliable. And what about the enemies who hit you but actually doesn't grant any energy? This is possible. It could be their hits don't count as hits, like DOT, or their hits drain energy, like the TV screens. Here, having excess energy is really good for your rotation. What if you rely on more than one character to be hit in order for the rotation to work properly? Overall, because of this entire thing, I hate kits that are based around you being need to be hit. QQ is another solid example of why a kit relying on RNG isn't favorable. She has her highs, but she also has her lows. You can make her work, but it is going to take effort. I know that a lot of people simply do not care about needing to be hit once or twice to make their rotations work. Maybe because it has worked for them up to this point. No? Well, every time those DOT bosses show up, people complain about their energy is not filling up fast and they're suffering, etc. And those same people will turn around and say that being hit is not a problem. To me, this is insufferable. How do you deal with your cognitive dissonance? Just tell me about it. Hopefully, I've done a good enough job of why I think relying on RNG is bad and I do not personally value it. Consistency is the name of the game when doing turn-based combat. Number 3, how easy it is to make them useless in a battle versus flexibility in the way that they operate. This is a really fun exercise that I like to do since it tests the limitations of a unit. DOT or Acheron teams will be crippled by enemies with huge effect res. Hypercarry teams can be and are crippled by the HP inflation that can only be addressed via dual or triple DPS setups, or setups that actually favor being hit multiple times by different characters, etc. Any teams requiring their energy-based alts will be crippled by energy-draining enemies. Break teams will be crippled if the enemies are not breakable. Follow-up teams can be crippled by enemies that counter. Bonus points if the damage scales with the number of times they were hit. HP manipulation units like Blade can be crippled by enemies that absorb any damage taken by ally units, even if they are self-inflicted, etc., etc. Number 4. The next thing to consider is flexibility in a way that a unit operates. A prime example of a kit that is inflexible is Jingliu. Jingliu basically is an untamed horse. She will do what she will do. Her action advance activates automatically when you reach full stack. The only way you can control it is by not using her skill or ult purposefully. After she goes into the enhanced form, you have no way of holding her powerful attacks back. You have to unleash it even if it will be wasted. This is extremely prevalent in the Aventurine fight where he stalls you like crazy and forces you to waste a turn attacking his dice. Because of this, she feels awful to play despite the fact that Aventurine is weak to ice. Fei Xiao's kit, on the other hand, is quite flexible. She can hold out her massive ults for when it should be used, and she has overcap for her ult, which is incredible. So not only she can delay her ult, but her ult overstacks. so it lets her do her attack whenever it is convenient. Quite a stark difference between the flexibility of these two characters, Jing Liu and Fei Xiao. Of course, I am not faulting Jing Liu for her inflexibility. She's an outdated character. I'm just showing my personal biases and how I judge a character's kit. Number 4, how niche they are versus how universal they are. As this is a gacha game, a unit being universal is an incredible trait. You have limited currency that you can spend to pull on characters, and hence why people tend to value this aspect of a character too. Of course, being universal isn't end-all be-all. There are incredibly niche but powerful and accessible teams. Firefly Break is one of them. Firefly, Ronmei, Harmony MC, and Gallagher, only requiring 2 limited 5-star characters, and one of which is a universal buffer for so many team compositions. So yes, you have to juggle the pros and cons here. Number 5, they require a dedicated support versus they work well even without a dedicated support. This is an extension of the last point, but I made it a separate section because I think it's worth highlighting. Requiring a dedicated support for a character to work is something I devalue immensely. A character should work on their own to a reasonable degree. A dedicated support raising their ceiling is totally acceptable, but requiring it to function at all is problematic. I think Jing Yuan falls into this category. His whole gimmick is that Lightning Lord dishes out huge damage. I don't know if you've used Jing Yuan, but Lightning Lord does not, in fact, dish out huge damage compared to other modern DPSs. He is critically weak to being CC'd, and Lightning Lord only attacking once per cycle limits his damage potential in a game where every endgame content is cycle gated and action value gated. For the average user, he feels awful to play. Sunday will fix 99% of his issues, and as a Jing Yuan main, I am very grateful. It feels incredible. However, from the perspective of analyzing his kit, I feel that his base kit was really bad and needed to be fixed. But they didn't, and now they are retroactively trying to fix him by giving him a support. But whatever, I appreciated Hoyoverse, my almighty lord. I owe you my life. Number 6, vertical investment is just a stat stick versus vertical investment transforms the kit and allow for unique experiences. When I decide to vertically invest in a character, it is because of 2 reasons. Number 1, their eidolons are powerful. Number 2, I like them and want them to be future-proof, more interesting to play, and make them the main character of the team and stand out from other folks who have low investment, right? I'm sure everyone can understand pulling for a low-level eidolon like E1 or E2 because they were powerful. It doesn't really matter if it's a stat stick eidolon as long as it's really, really powerful and worth the money. So let's move on to the second point. I like them and want them to be future-proof, more interesting to play, make them the main character of the team, and stand out from people with lower investments, etc. What I'm looking for when highly investing in a unit that I love are those things. A lot of people who like said characters will invest. So from that perspective, right, if I pulled for a higher eidolon, I need it to be incredibly noticeable, not just in raw damage, but in a way that they operate. I think it is completely reasonable to make higher eidolon playstyles to be so uniquely different that it is recognizable. For example, I am watching an E6 Sunday demo and I go, wow, they have E6 without me checking their build or stats. I genuinely don't think I'm being unreasonable at all when I say this, but apparently this is a hot take. If I used 1,500 pulls to get E6, I need people to know that I have E6, okay? Even without me telling them, it should be obvious. This is editing, Haku. I just want to clarify. When I mean that I want something to be distinctive and transformative, I'm mostly talking about higher eidolon changes. Someone who's investing in them because they like the character a lot. Because in most cases, a lot of people who go for E6s like the character a lot. And it would be nice
for them to show off their E6 and it being immediately recognizable, because E6 transforms the character so much so that it is very different from how an E0 or an E1 operates. I hope that made sense.
Not everyone will agree, but based on my personal opinion about eidolons, I think a stat stake eidolon is boring. What is the functional difference between a stat stake eidolon and having a great harmony character? There isn't. No matter how powerful the stat stake eidolon is, it is going to be less powerful than having the latest harmony unit. Because of this, I much prefer an eidolon that can change how the character plays, even if it looks less powerful on the surface.
And again, I would like to reiterate that this bias that I have increases with the level of investment. I don't really mind E1 and E2 being just really powerful stat sticks. I really don't. I think that's reasonable for a quote-unquote low investment of E1 or E2. What I'm trying to focus on is, as you invest more and more into the eidolons, I want something transformative rather than a stat stick, because you can just get a new harmony character to provide more stat sticks. I hope that was clear. I'm just really trying to make it clear for everyone. As a general rule, I don't really like stat stick eidolons because I think they are boring, but having really strong E1 or E2 stat stake eidolon is not something that I'm really against. What I'm really against is as you invest more and more into the character and the only thing you get is a stat stake.
Number 7, characters require high investment to work properly versus characters work even at low investments. I much value Firefly for their ability to be useful in low investments. Her teammates are accessible, but also building her in the first place is quite easy. She doesn't need her Lycone at all, and just compare that to normal hyper carries where their crit values matter a lot, and having not good enough stats can make or break the run very easily. Number 8, requires technical understanding to make them work versus easy to use. I do value playstyles that require proficiency from the player, like break focus teams, using Luca and Boot Hill, not Super Break though. I think Luca Boot Hill Break is some of the most fun and hyped teams. However, my enjoyment of said playstyle does not affect my ability to judge it as exclusionary. Most people play on auto, and I think that's valid. Playing Boot Hill on auto is not the way to go, and hence why I devalue the characters that are difficult to use. A tool should be universal. A tool that's difficult to use for a majority of the players should not be rated highly blindly. It can be rated highly with the caveat that it requires skill and knowledge, but yes, you need to supplement that information. Now that I've thoroughly explained my own biases when assessing characters' kit, I hope it is very clear why I think Sunday's eidolons are underwhelming and why V5 nerfs made me very mad. First, I prefer a unit that is more universal than niche. Sunday's non-summon team comps were nerfed, and I understand it is negligible at this moment in time. But we don't know how that's going to affect the future. It might compound into a bigger problem. Second, I prefer a unit that does not rely on RNG of any kind. Sunday relies on RNG if he's not using his signature Lycone or Bronya's S3 Lycone. Needing to be hit is not a hard thing right now, but that can change in the future. From the way Hoyo is gatekeeping his energy requirement behind his Lycone makes me think that a meta where enemies do not give you energy is fairly close. Furthermore, I would like to make a special note on Sunday's E4. This eidolon allows you to ult every 2 turns only when you have his S5. Now, a lot of folks say that his E4 is still very useful because you only need to be hit once for it to do its function, given that you are using Sunday's Lycone. I don't really like to rely on being hit to make my E4S1 Sunday work. Just because you didn't get hit, you don't get to utilize an eidolon that costs you up to 1,080 pulls? Do you think that's fair and reasonable? I disagree. I think E4 should work regardless of whether or not Sunday gets hit. But I guess that's just my opinion. Psych. It isn't actually, because if Hoyoverse actually thought, yeah, just getting hit once, it's not a problem, it's not a big deal, why would they sell his eidolons this way, okay? You know that they like to create problems and sell you the solution, right? Yes, this is something that might be a huge deal in the future. Third, I prefer a unit with eidolons that are transformative. Sunday's eidolons are basically all stat sticks. One exception is his E1, which allows him to ult in 2 turns if you have his S5. I've already explained this in the previous section, but yeah, whatever. If it wasn't locked behind an S5, I would call this eidolon transformative and cool. Thumbs up. And again, I know some people say E4 is fine since you only need to be hit once for it to work as long as you have his signature. But you know, I value not relying on RNG, and I will never do calculations assuming that you get hit. Being hit is an assumption that people take for granted. I find it problematic that people refuse to even acknowledge this when we have literal examples in game right now. Anyways, his E6 transforms overcrit into crit damage. This is a comfort eidolon, a stat stick plus some utility, because otherwise Sunday's buffs would result in most DPS's overcritting. Hence why they introduced this mechanic. It's by no means transformative, and it's not something I'm looking for when I get someone's E6. I think a mechanic that warrants a description such as unique would be something wild, like Sunday having his own summons that do something special when you reach E6. For instance, giving him the ability to give his small minions to the character targeted by his skill, effectively making them a summoner even though they are not in their base kit. This would actually be unique and help out the old DPSs tremendously. I think they need something like this. Fourth, I prefer a unit that can work in suboptimal situations. So we understand that Sunday is a dedicated summon/servant support, right? What happens if summon servants are no longer meta? Just as Sparkle suffered due to the hypercarry meta being crushed, Sunday will have the same fate. This is why I much prefer a unit that is universal. Being universal makes them more viable in different compositions and more resistant to power creep. And again, this is also why I much prefer a vertical investment to transform a character or widen their niche or etc., etc. With all that said, I hope it is extremely clear why I make the assessments that I make. I find Sunday's eidolons to be bad, and even after writing literal thousands and thousands of words describing how I arrived at this specific conclusion, I know I will be called a doom poster who doesn't know what they're talking about. Look, I know that Jiaochu got doom posted to hell, but I don't think this is the case for Sunday. I actually think the toxic positivity is a rampant vocal minority in the community and even results in misinformation being spread. You guys are overcorrecting. I know you like Sunday. I like Sunday too, so let's keep it real. Hoyo wants to nerf his usage outside his niche. His eidolons are trash, and we should have gotten something better. And I don't care if other harmonies have bad eidolons too, okay? Sunday's potential is locked behind his signature somewhat, and substituting with any other light cone gives subpar results, more so than other characters. Even with all this, despite all this, he is a powerful support for now. He will be meta-defining and a key piece of the puzzle for the summons and servants. Okay, well, thank you for watching. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. I really wasn't going to talk about his kit until he actually released, but oh boy, this was necessary. Anyways, goodbye. See y'all later. Bye.